Welcome to Listening to UCR, a podcast production by the Faculty Welfare Committee of the Department of Statistics at the University of California, Riverside. My name is Daniel Jeske, and my co-host is Esra Kurum. Our guest on this podcast is Dylan Rodriguez, a faculty member and the chair of the Senate Division at UCR.
Dylan, thank you for accepting to be our first podcast.
Yeah.
Can you give us a little bit information about your background?
Absolutely, yes. I started at UC Riverside right out of my PhD. I finished my PhD at UC Berkeley in 2001 in ethnic studies, and literally a month later was here at UCR starting my job. And I was in ethnic studies until July 1st of 2017, at which point I moved my faculty line to the lovely, amazing collegial department of media and cultural studies, where I am now. And I started as the chair of the Academic Senate on September 1st of 2016. And so I'm in the middle of my second year.
What kind of Senate activities had you done prior to becoming chair?
I think we worked together, didn't we?
We were on
the athletics,
yeah.
Athletics Academic Evaluation Committee.
We did a review of the academic support system.
We did. That was a number of years ago. So I worked with them. I served as the chair of another system-wide committee, the UC's collaboration with historically Black colleges and universities, and it's kind of vets different proposals that faculty from UCs submit to create kind of year-long as well as summer-focused programs that invite undergraduates from historically Black colleges to UC campuses.
You mentioned some system-wide responsibilities, and maybe it would be good if you could explain a little bit about how the division interwork with the Office of the President.
For sure. Well, the way that the Academic Senate works is that we have a system-wide Senate that is centered in Oakland. So our chair, system-wide chair, Shane White, and our vice chair are both there. And the way that it works is a quick turnover by design. Every system-wide chair has a one-year term. When their term ends, the vice chair take over. The system-wide Senate is in daily direct dialogue with the UC President's office. The system-wide Senate chair's office is literally down the hallway from the UC system president's office. So they'll constantly be in dialogue about matters that are of system-wide relevance and importance. And then our job here at our campus, as well as at the other UC campuses, is to run what they call divisional senates. My job as the divisional chair is to attend monthly convenings, usually of divisional chairs plus the system-wide leadership. And that's where we'll talk about things that are both specific to our campuses and are kind of more or less universal across the UC system campuses. Whether it's, transfer enrollments, whether it's the kind of tuition or fee increases, whether it's issues with facilities, undergrad student enrollment growth, those kinds of. So we'll engage all those kinds of things. So we'll discuss all those things at the system-wide level.
What type of inquiries people come to you within the UCR system? Because you seem to be the link between the president and the faculty.
Yes. So ideally, I should really serve as the link between our faculty and our larger divisional senate, and to a broader extent, our faculty and the system-wide senate. I never thought I'd see the day where there was such a crisis around parking for faculty members, whether it's lecturers, ladder-rank faculty members. That's one of the first things I actually brought to our administration, was to say, we have a serious problem where recently hired faculty are actually telling me that they're losing office hours time, they're losing lab time, they're having to structure their day around fighting with each other and with students for parking. And then they got to walk 20 minutes from Lot 30, from what we call Disneyland, right? To get to campus. And so things that seem to be mundane are actually really critical because they affect the everyday responsibilities and duties of our colleagues. So that was actually an important first lesson that I learned when I became divisional senate chair, was that something as seemingly mundane as parking has direct impact, and in this case, adverse impact on our people doing their job. Right?
I think it could even discourage people from coming to the campus.
It does, because after 10:30, I can't park at Lot 30. I have to pay to park.
That's right.
Close to the...
And I don't think we really want high percentages of our faculty to be working from home all the time.
It's tough.
Yeah,
it's tough. And especially if you're a recently hired faculty, you want to be on campus.
Yeah,
exactly.
You want to get a sense of who our people are here.
Yeah.
You want to attend the events on campus. A lot of times, if you're bringing a kind of new field of research into your department, undergrad and grad students are all over you.
Yeah.
Right? Because there's a reason you got hired.
Right.
There's a reason the department wanted you. It's because you're filling some kind of intellectual and curricular need that students and colleagues sense. There's other kinds of things that are more conventionally and obviously impactful on UC Riverside's faculty's kind of research mission. So I've been approached by department chairs, individual faculty, and groups of faculty about things like office space, lab space, and research space. Like many universities, our growth as a campus has not been paralleled with, I think, an adequate growth in facilities for research. So this is something we're struggling with, and we're trying to figure out how to move forward in a constructive, productive way. Another major issue in 2016, 2017 that faculty approached me with was the Child Development Center. There was a lot of struggle with administration over the future of the CDC. So that was a major issue. My children, I have a 14-year-old and a 10-year-old. So it is something that's on my mind because I have a lot of colleagues with younger children. But the kind of future of the CDC as such was kind of at stake, and we were able to kind of negotiate something to keep it in place. So really, faculty have approached me with all different kinds of things. Right?
So there are actually lots of avenues on the campus for grievances and seeking counsel, and it seems like you have a very open door policy. But do you think that maybe if a faculty has an issue that they want to get some light shined on, that maybe they should start with the chair and go through the dean's office, or come to you directly?
It really depends, Dan, because sometimes faculty approach me, and for good reason, they don't want to approach campus council or their chair, or even the ombuds. So I'm totally open to that, and I'll just let people. I'm transparent, person, and so I'll let people know this is something you should really talk to X and X and X about. And then, but then sometimes periodically people will say, well, I'm not comfortable talking to them for these reasons. And then we got to kind of put our heads together, and I'll consult with different folks on campus about who the best person or people are.
Might you possibly refer them to one of the standing committees, for example?
Yeah, that's happened more than once. Mm-hmm. So oftentimes the Committee on Faculty Welfare is one of our most active committees. Sometimes it'll be something like physical resources and planning. Right, so it's Committee on Research. I mean, we have all these different standing committees, which again, the listeners can find a list of all the standing committees and their membership and their chairs on the Senate website.
I think there's 16 of them or something.
Yeah,
like that.
And then there's other committees that are created kind of ad hoc. There's special review committees. So at any given time, there's kind of the standing committees plus X number of other committees that have been convened for different reasons. So periodically, people will kind of have a reason to open a discussion with the chair of one of the committees, and then the chair will bring it to the committee as a concern.
I think one of the things that I remember about your presentation when I first came in was shared governance.
Yes.
I'm sure people ask you about it because I think it's something that you send emails and you talk a lot about, which is, for me, I remember we also talked about this. It's not perfectly clear, so I'm sure that that's one of the concerns that new faculty brings up to you.
This is what's interesting about shared governance is that you hear it invoked all the time, and it seems that no one actually knows what it means, right? And so there's good reason for this. There's good reason for that state of affairs. And that's because if I was to kind of give you a soundbite version of this, shared governance is only the way in which it is practiced. It only means what is practiced. Shared governance is what you actually do. So there are principles of shared governance, right, which I can briefly talk about. But I think what's just as important is thinking about the history of shared governance. So shared governance is a concept that emerges during the 1960s. I think in significant part as a response to the various freedom and liberation movements that had emerged over the mid-century into the latter 20th century. So there was a sense that educational institutions, particularly public universities, needed to be responsive to kind of a democratic, anti-racist, feminist, anti-colonial impulse, and begin to kind of multiply the avenues for input in the everyday operation of the university, right? Particularly because campuses were such primary sites for people to articulate those demands and those kind of freedom struggles. So shared governance becomes articulated during the 1960s as a principle of collaboration, of sharing, and of really, most importantly for me, accountability between administration, students, and faculty. But when you look at the kind of history of shared governance, those are generally the constituencies that get mentioned. It'll be administration, faculty, students. So the principle was that administration would continue to be accountable for running the university. The difference now is that there would be a structure in place at a given university or university system that would facilitate robust, consistent, and maybe even contentious feedback from faculty, and periodically on particular issues from students as well. So given that, people sometimes misunderstand or presume that shared governance is some kind of legal or pseudo-legal obligation. It's actually not, right? It's more of a cultural practice within an institution. So you can actually, and I've seen this many times where I'll talk to colleagues that are from institutions or that have come from institutions that nominally have a system of shared governance, but in which it is weak. So they'll say, well, at my institution, shared governance was bullshit. I mean, we didn't really do it. Right, administration never came to us, or we'd give them feedback and they'd ignore us. And so they would come here. They come here and they oh wow, the shared governance seems to be different here. I think in recent times there's a perception. I think it's a reality as well that shared governance is fairly strong at UC Riverside. But that's only because of the faculty, right? It's only because of the faculty and the leadership of the faculty and the faculty being willing to engage with our colleagues in the administration, as well as with their own colleagues, to kind of help shape decision making. But it's a bureaucratic system that's intended to inform and hold accountable the kind of longer term administrative bureaucracy. In the kind of hierarchy of shared governance power, I'm the equal of the chancellor.
Can I just ask you though on that point? Is it really equal?
No,
or no, because so therefore shared governance is kind of a misnomer, right?
It's more of a sharing of input.
You're
right?
sort of like an advisor.
Yes, right? So I represent the interests and the positionality of the faculty in those kind of high-level conversations with the provost, with the chancellor, and with others, right? So that's why it's important that, to me, it's an obligation to keep you have to have an open door. Not only that, I have to leave my open door and go to your all's departments and talk to you. I have to seek you out. That's what I'm in the process of doing right now, and I did it last fall as well. I have to hear where people are at, right? And if people are cool with everything, that's great. But usually there's something, more than something. There's usually a lot of stuff that people will bring up that is both specific to their department and which they may not realize is actually a set of concerns or questions that are shared across departments and sometimes colleges. So in that sense, the way that the shared governance relationship works is it has to be inhabited by people. Like people have to actually understand what the principles are and then be willing to practice it, act on it, inhabit it, play it out. So in that sense, shared governance is a kind of principle of collaboration. But I will say this, the most difficult and potentially kind of friction-ridden component of it is that my interpretation of it is that it's a way to hold our administrators accountable, right? And we don't have any kind of form of punitive legal, authority over our administrators. We don't have that. But if we have a structure of shared governance that we practice, and we have something like an academic senate that we inhabit and turn to its best possible uses, then accountability is also what you make of it, right? Accountability is not just a kind of legal or juridical relationship. It's also what you do. So, Dan's done this many times, right, at this point, where we'll have a conversation among Senate leadership and we'll say, okay, there's X, Y, and Z going on. We have a lot of questions about this. Mm-hmm. And then we will have the conversation with our relevant administrator or administrators and ask the questions. And then now they have to respond to us. Now, without shared governance, none of that ever happens. So what I just was describing to you as this kind of hypothetical scenario that we play out all the time, that's actually the kind of process of accountability.
And although the administration doesn't always have to abide by the advice you provide, they probably learn quickly that if they continue to ignore you all the time, that they're probably not going to be very popular.
Right. Well, I mean, this is what happened to us last year. I mean, my first year as Senate chair was just absolutely incredibly contentious, but at the same time, it was a deep sense of responsibility to the faculty to kind of facilitate some kind of solution to all these antagonisms that seem to be pervading the campus, and which really had, this is a word I haven't used yet, but it had a lot to do with respect, right? There was a sense that faculty really clearly articulated that they didn't feel respected. So it's at that point where I think I'm an elected person. That's the other thing I was going to point out. The difference in shared governance, the primary difference that I joke about in my presentations between the chancellor and me is that ostensibly in the hierarchy of power, we're ostensibly equals, right? But the difference is that the chair of the academic senate's elected. And not only that, they have a limited term. I have a 2-year term, and if I want to run again, I get one more term, and then that's it. So at most, I serve for 4 years, and then it's over. So as an elected representative of the faculty, then it's my obligation to kind of, first of all, understand where people are at. And then if the concerns are so acute, then I have to figure out what to do. I have to do that in coordination and conversation with everyone else that'll talk to me, regardless of whether I personally, support a particular position. If I'm hearing faculty say something, even if I personally don't experience things that way, right? That's my job. My job is to communicate this. So this is what went down during academic year 16-17. one of our main preoccupations throughout the year was how do we move so that faculty, number one, can articulate the sense that they don't feel respected. That in order to feel respected, really what they're asking for is to be enabled the way that the institution ought to enable them to do their job, fulfill their obligations, to be their best possible faculty selves and mentoring and teaching selves. In that sense, respect wasn't really about kind of a sense of personal respect. It was respecting the position of being a faculty member here. That's what moved me so much. It made me feel so responsible to everybody. Was that the sense of respect that they are. And we're always struggling for that, right? In a certain way. But it was particularly, I think, urgent.
Yeah, I think that time also that was my first year coming that. I think that's the time I actually realized the shared governance, as you also said, is not something special.
Yeah.
It should be there. And if it's not there, then there is a problem.
Right on.
Actually.
Thank you for saying that.
Now, my understanding is not every university does choose for this, right? And that can be a problem for people new to UC that aren't used to shared governance.
That's right.
Right.
And by extension, there are sometimes people who come to UCR from institutions that ostensibly do have shared governance, but it doesn't look the way it does here.
It's weaker
in the UC system. Right. Usually it's because it's weaker, or it's just a kind of different structure of collaboration and engagement. So I think that's also been part of the proverbial learning curve with a lot of our folks on campus now who are relatively recently arriving. There's a kind of culture shock in a certain sense. I can't just do what I do. I got all these ambitions and plans as an administrator. I want to make this stuff happen. And stuff has to slow down now because I got to talk to the faculty. The Senate is in my ear. The Senate chair is in my ear, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a different sense of time. People don't have to curb their ambition, but they do have to kind of contextualize it in dialogue with others, which means that people might tell them what you envision might not be best for what we're doing here. And then you got to make a decision as the administrator. You might choose to do what you do anyways, but now at least you understand, and you ought to anticipate that there's going to be a response from your people. Leadership that's accountable for the entire thing is the Board of Regents. They appoint the UC system president. So when you talk about kind of the lines of accountability, it always comes back to the regents. You know what I mean?
Right. And who picks the regents?
Governor.
So is that a little bit of an old boys club?
Old boys and to a lesser extent, a growing multicultural and more diverse club. But you'll notice that oftentimes, depending on who the governor is and what their kind of proclivities are, that there'll be, CEOs of insurance companies. There are oftentimes people who don't have any direct or really any serious and substantive indirect experience with education.
Are those paid positions?
You know what? I don't think so. I'd have to look at that. But the folks on the Board of Regents, they don't leave their day job to become regents. Okay. Yeah, but they're significant terms. I believe they're 10-year terms.
Do they serve like a Supreme Court? There is one, I don't know, like a liberal version of it, and there's conservative. See,
it depends who the governor is. Okay, and it depends how the governor wants to kind of parcel these appointments out. Because it's an honorific, right? To be appointed a UC Board of Regents member is an honor. It's a lot of work, too. They attend these hearings and these meetings all the time. But I think it's intended to be a kind of nonpartisan board. But of course, it doesn't necessarily play out that way.
You want to say a little bit about the relationship Governor Brown has with the UC system? It's
difficult. Most recently, the governor's office is only approving a 3% increase in the UC system budget, whereas the promise had been 4%. So I think that's a shot directly at the UC system, and it kind of seen as a punishment for the ethical problems that the UC Office of the President has been kind of committing in recent months.
I've heard people say that Governor Brown prefers the CSU system to the
absolutely.
UC system.
And not just Governor Brown, I think it's the California State Legislature by and large.
Yeah. Why would they think that?
Well, so what I've learned from the kind of set of dialogues at my monthly visits to the Academic Council, which is all the divisional chairs and the system-wide chair, part of it sits with the leadership of the UC system. The leadership of our UC system, meaning the Office of the President and others, in recent times have not done an adequate job, much less a good job, in communicating what is so distinctive and important about the University of California system, right? Why it's important for the state of California to have a kind of network of research universities that, on the face of it, don't rely on one so-called flagship institution, but on paper anyways have a set of equal institutions who are generating groundbreaking research in every possible field. We understand, meaning faculty, right? Faculty, because we're research faculty, we understand what's so important about a public research university and the UC in particular. But the rank and file of the California State Legislature, for that matter, the governor's office, don't adequately understand or appreciate that at this point, right? And so part of this sits with the leadership, that the contrast then the legislature and governor's office draw between the CSU system and the UC system is really in terms of, well, how many widgets are you producing, right? Meaning how many degrees are you producing? Yeah. And if the CSU system is producing X number of degrees at a higher rate of efficiency and the UC system is not keeping up with that, well then they're looking at us and they're saying, well, what are you spoiled brats doing your average? Maybe you all need to teach more classes.
And they don't weight PhD degrees like
there's not an adequate literacy, not remotely adequate literacy around what it means for the UC system to be producing, PhD students, like literally the next generation of researchers and professors, in the United States and elsewhere in the world.
And I think they actually, this might be just hearsay, but I think they actually didn't give us enough funding because we weren't getting, as a UC Riverside, we weren't getting enough transfer students. That's one of the topics, right?
This is one of the political footballs that got thrown around. It's kind of an artificial standard, this so-called 2-to-1 transfer student ratio. It's us and UC Merced, right, and Santa Cruz that get targeted with this requirement that we bring our transfers up. The UC system as a whole has a better than 2-to-1 ratio, right, as a whole. So
this is the ratio of incoming freshmen compared to transfer students from community colleges.
Exactly. So there's an insistence that the ratio of incoming first year freshman students to transfer students be 2-to-1. Right. So the point is that UCR has a far lower number of transfer students than most other campuses in the UC system, which should be fine because that can be explained by geography, it can be explained by socioeconomic status, it can be 1,000 different things. And the system as a whole has met that ratio. That's part of the master plan. But the governor's office decided to kind of create this standard. Oh no, it's not just the system as a whole that should meet that ratio. It's every campus. And so the perception anyways, both by the system-wide Senate and by the president's office, what I've heard, is that this is kind of a political leverage point that was created to kind of punish the UC system.
Do you want to say a little bit about how much time this job that you have as chair of our Senate takes from your other activities like teaching and research? And
it's hard for me to even talk about it because I actually, for the most part, I actually enjoy this. I enjoy this job. It's a really weird thing, but maybe that's partly because it gets me out of the house every day. It takes up a lot of time, right? There's a reason why the Senate chair has a full course release, but that's not attractive to me either. So I've actually taught one class each of the 2 years so far that I've served as chair.
Because that's probably something you enjoy doing.
Absolutely. No, that's the reason I'm in this gig. The workload is greatly lightened by the fact that I have so much help.
Do you still find time for your creative work?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's the other reason I'm here, right? Yeah. No, I'd feel intellectually dead if I wasn't involved, engaged in my creative work.
What about opportunities for new faculty to get involved with the Senate? What would you recommend?
Yes. Well, first of all, feel free to talk to me. I think part of it is informing oneself about what their obligations are as a researcher and teacher first, right? Before you start thinking about what levels of the Senate relationship to get yourself entwined in, right? Especially if you feel like a second-year assistant professor, right? Like your job is to get tenure right now. So I want you in the Senate, but I don't want you trying to chair a Senate, right? And if you talk to me, then I'm going to tell you there are different Senate committees that you can and should join, which will not get in the way of your progress toward tenure. For that matter, associate professor colleagues, I'll say the same thing to, right? I don't want to prescribe to people what committees they should look at. They should look at what the committees are, the charges of the committees. Every year around late winter, early spring, there's a call out from the Senate asking people to literally make a list of 2 or 3, or you can just put 1 if you want, Senate committees that you'd like to volunteer for. And then we have a committee that's called the Committee on Committees, COC. The Committee on Committees is one of the most important committees in the Senate because what they do is they make appointments to those Senate committees. So they'll look at that list, that exhaustive list of all the committees people volunteer for, and they'll start kind of parceling people in.
I suppose it's probably a really good idea by the time you put your file up for tenure to have some sort of Senate service.
Yeah, I think it's really important actually. Yeah. And I think we're privileged at UCR that we have faculty that are looking to serve in the Senate, but you can never have enough of that. Right, because I know folks from other campuses where it's a struggle. It's a struggle to get enough people to kind of put themselves out there for Senate work. I think part of this too is that there has to be a kind of culture among department chairs to not further burden their departmental colleagues who are doing significant Senate committee service with other departmental committee service. right? Because people have limited labor, energy, and time. So, if you have somebody who's serving on committees, or serving on committee on academic personnel, or chairing the committee on faculty welfare, I just ask of you, please try not to overburden them with departmental committee work, because they're doing a vital service to the campus with other things.
It is challenging in small departments.
Yes.
Departments is how do you distribute? Because a lot of the work is the same.
Yes.
Search committees and course curriculum development and seminar committees.
Yes, and you still want members of those small departments to be leading members of the Senate.
Yeah.
Right. Otherwise, it's always big departments that get the leadership positions in the Senate. So it's a delicate balancing act. For folks early in their careers, in particular, where generally editorial committees solicit people who are at least at the associate professor level, then Senate committee service, departmental committee service becomes an opportune way to demonstrate that you're fulfilling your responsibilities at the level of service.
It just also seems like an effective way to get more at home with your campus, to understand what's going on in the different corners.
That's probably the most privileged thing I've experienced in the year and a half I've served as Senate Chair, is being in the position to talk to people from all around the campus.
Is there anything coming down the pike that faculty should know about that's on your radar?
Well, absolutely, there is. I'll just talk about one thing. We have what is called the 5th year campus stewardship review of the Chancellor. So our Chancellor, Kim Wilcox, is now in his 5th year as Chancellor of UCR. The most important thing that anyone listening to this podcast who's a Senate member should do is they should participate in that survey. I don't care if you write one sentence. Review does not mean slam, criticize, curse out, whatever. It means review. So it's praise, it's questions, it's criticism, it's all the above. It's just like any other review. It's important that we get as widespread a response as possible. So that's the one thing I'll plug to anyone listening to this.
Well, again, thank you for your time and visiting with us.
Yeah, right on.